Herbaria, the collections themselves are the closest thing we can get to a time machine of previous habitats, previous localities, previous ecosystems.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. This is Billy Brown and
Tony Crosdale.
So Tony, you explain. What are we doing in your basement?
Okay, this is like a soft opening of the studio here. We still haven't gotten the new mics and soundproofing and stuff, but Billy and I just assembled my Billy shelves.
Here's to IKEA. Yep.
And
the best named bookshelves in the world.
Indeed.
Except for the Tonys, which you can't get in the United States.
Oh, those exist?
No, I'm joking.
Oh, okay. You never know. There'd be like an umlaut over the O. But yeah, we just assembled the bookshelves.
Especially with you, a metal umlaut over the O.
Yeah. And then we put up all my reference books. I still got to find places for my like natural history, writing and journals, those kind of books. But like the field guides and reference books are all up right now, and it definitely makes the studio feel good.
And it's such an aspirational activity to shelve a whole bunch of someone else's nature books, because there's all these books you don't have, and not even mentioning the bird books, which is its own library that I'm sitting next to essentially. But just looking at like beetles of North America over there, or Eastern North America. And I had the spark of the feeling of, oh, now I'm going to learn beetles, which I'm probably never going to learn beetles, because that's incredible.
And I have a whole...
but it's still like fun to think about it, you know?
And I have a shelf that's half full of books in my office that I really should, purchase those books again for the center and move those home. I got a lot of books there, like a lot of my insect books and things are over there, because I'm more likely to encounter insects to identify at work than home. Well, I said that. I mean, yes, this is the Urban Wildlife Podcast, and we celebrate wildlife that you can find, sidewalk cracks and abandoned lots and all that. But now I live next to a 1,900-acre park, and my property.
This is the Wissahickon Park we've talked about before, and where Tony used to work. Yeah.
So I live, 2 houses down from the trailhead, and, my block is, I don't have to cross the street to get to the park. So, like, the park kind of, like, merges into my backyard, not mine directly, but, it's pretty contiguous. So, inevitably, by the laws of island biogeography, you're going to find more diversity of animals and plants as part of a contiguous piece of habitat than you are a fragment.
Yes, you will.
So, before, I was more likely to encounter insects I didn't know and needed to identify at work. Now I'm about equally as likely.
Yeah.
So now I have justification to also, just because of doing my job and getting things going at the center, we have more of an income stream that I can afford to purchase the books, because they're good to have at work anyway, They have value for my guests. Because now I keep those books in my office because I don't want the general public to handle them, And so if I purchase them, and I can not only can take them home, but I can put them on display where they could be used by the general public.
Yep.
So
it's your personal collection.
Yeah.
Yep. Awesome. And what kind of birds have you seen in your backyard so far?
It's been awesome. The birding is actually better out of my front yard than my backyard in some ways, because I have a clearer view of the park from my front yard, because my backyard is actually a steep hill. From the top of my hill, I can...
And your house faces north, so I bet you have better light looking from your front yard versus...
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
And so the first day, we're doing this in January. We moved here December 1st. The first morning we woke up in this house, December 2nd, I guess, we look out, and I have a Bradford pear, which, if you know your trees, is
it's time to cut that down.
It's a terrible, terrible tree. It's the branches have tight crotches, and they're known to snap and fall on things, and they can become invasive.
Yep.
So I have a Bradford pear, and I was bummed about it. But apparently, yeah, apparently, in December, I guess when the fruit is going through a couple frosts, it becomes very desirable for
Cedar waxwings.
cedar waxwings.
Woo!
Oh, hello, Shamu, my new cat.
Your new old cat, as you discovered.
We'll talk about Shamu in a minute, but Shamu, come on up. Has joined us, and
But you were saying that you got some nice frugivorous
it's full of
birds
robins,
in your...
waxwings, and a Baltimore Oriole. And a Baltimore Oriole should be in Belize or Costa Rica right now. They are known. Some linger on, and some even overwinter here or there. It's not like the rarest of things, but it eBird flagged it and put it out on the rare bird alert. So saw probably first winter male Baltimore Oriole. That was really cool. And then I've had pileated woodpecker from the house. I've had a raven, which in this part of in the Piedmont is pretty rare.
Yeah,
they're getting more common. And then we had a bald eagle, like a second-year bald eagle, flying down. I could see that flying over the park. I could see it. So it's been quite good.
Yeah.
I have bald eagle and raven, and before I have rock dove, a rock pigeon. But speaking of cats, my cat just showed up and is now, you might hear purring because it's quite near the recorder. But so I adopted a cat that I guess I rescued it because it literally showed up in the park. And it was very friendly. It's a tuxedo cat. I have a thing for tuxedo cats. We talked about tuxedo cats before.
Yes, we have.
And we talked about Shamu before. But Shamu, I took Shamu to the vet, and I took a risk and had it at the time. I thought it was a boy. We observed the junk. Thought we saw a deflated scrot there. And we took Shamu into the vet, and the vet said it was at least 5 years old by his teeth, and he's 14 pounds. So indicated that this cat had been cared for until fairly recently, because you're not going to have a 14-pound cat, right, in the wild.
Yeah.
So, and how friendly he is. So scanned him for a chip, had a chip, and I said, okay, look up the chip.
Dun, dun, dun.
But, we got to be careful because people dump cats and dogs, for that matter, in my park all the time. I don't want this cat to go back to an irresponsible pet owner.
Yep.
So they said they're going to call the person, and they can contact me if they wanted the cat back and get it from me.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a good way to handle it. But they also gave me the person's info, which I don't know if they're supposed to, but they did. So I Googled the person. Turns out she died.
Yeah.
Some months ago, and her house is 5 blocks from the park, and I'm a few blocks south of that. So to me, and there's an extremely busy street in between. So the thought that this cat somehow managed to get to the park on its own and then find my facility over the rec center, which is much closer.
No, the cat got dumped. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's clear the cat, probably someone inherited the cat after she died and dumped it. And the person's picture, she looked lovely. Big smile. So I hope that, obviously I don't, believe that you are conscious and in heaven after death, but, if there is some sort of thing like that, that person can rest assured knowing that this cat is well loved.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. And yeah, maybe we won't beat the cat drum for today, but yeah, saving some of our anger for as much as we get angry at the people who, what I call the cat hoarders and the invasive species lobby, which is Tony's term. Always got to credit him for that. You also got to save some anger for the people that dump their cats.
But yeah, I also have some sympathy because I bet you these folks are, they could be jerks, but they could also in their mind be cats are fine outside, and
they're worried it's going to get put down if they drop it off at ACT.
Yeah, or they called up the nearest animal shelter.
This is the frustrating part. Yeah, go ahead.
And I've tried to bring cats to the nearest. For me, I think we covered it. I don't drive, and I'm not going to Uber. I'm not going to spend $30 to Uber to North Philly to drop off a cat and then take an hour and a half bus back.
Yeah.
But there's I can buy public. I've actually before put a cat in a box and took it on the L to literally duct taped it in a cardboard box with holes in it and took it to the shelter down on 11th and Spruce or whatever that Locust. And
the Morris, I like them. I think they're open admission.
Not anymore.
Yeah, they are.
I called them and said they're full.
Oh crap.
And they said they won't. They said they're like, well, we'd have to euthanize a cat to bring yours in. The one you have. And I was like, well, that's fine with me. And that was another good cat. But luckily, someone else adopted that one. And Shamu, who was named Oreo originally. But
Shamu's a better name.
Yeah. And Shamu jumped on my lap and then onto my shoulder. And I was like, well, I'm keeping it. So we lucked out. And this cat, by the way, is a slaughterer. It caught a mouse already in the house. It just now caught a camel cricket. Yeah. And but Shamu occasionally will make a dash for it outside. He'll go right for the birds. He sits in the window and whines at birds. So good thing this cat's inside.
Indeed.
What's our topic today, Billy?
Well, our topic today...
real quick.
Yes?
As always, we're partially sponsored by Steiner. Gotta mention them.
Yes, we should.
Yeah.
What does Steiner do, Tony?
Steiner makes incredibly wonderful optics.
There you go. So Tony and I were just talking about how I have a pair of Eagle Optics binoculars that I like. I actually got a pair originally when I got married the first time back in 2005, and a birder friend, I was not a birder at all at that point, was like, here you go, you can look at turtles with it. And I did. But also, I beat the crap out of that pair of binoculars over the years, and then sent them in. They replaced them, which I now realize is a binocular thing, but I still find it amazing that quality binocular manufacturers just replace your binoculars when they break, even if it's sometimes your fault. In any case, I got those, but they're starting to show their wear. Little parts are falling off and things like that. And I think I don't know if I'm different than birders are generally, because I'll throw them in a backpack to go hiking for all day, and in a case and stuff, but still pull them out, or I'll hike with them for miles, and they're sort of bouncing around on my chest while I'm doing it, and I'm wondering if I need sturdier binoculars, and so that's what we were talking about with the Steiners. And
I recommend Steiner. I mean, Steiner, I think their bread and butter is military binoculars.
Yeah,
and they design binoculars that are meant, and let's face it, the military are notoriously hard on their stuff.
One would expect them to be sturdy equipment if you're using it in the
military stuff tends to be overbuilt.
Yeah.
So, the binoculars, two pair. I was so funny we call them pairs of binoculars because they're not. I mean, they have two.
It's lenses. One object with two lenses.
Yeah.
Or
but
two sets of lenses.
My Steiners, I have two Steiners, and the highest end they make in a middle range pair. I guess for them they're lower end because they start at $300 or whatever.
Okay.
And they just seem extremely sturdy to me.
Yeah.
And I really like them.
Awesome. I want to mention a couple quick things. Thank you to Dean Barata for chipping in recently on our Patreon account. If you want to go to www.patreon.com/urbanwildlifecast and help support the podcast, we are not a charitable organization. We're just a couple of guys who do this on the side. And so what you'd be doing is just basically helping us buy the new equipment, which will be really helpful.
Yeah, and I mentioned
improve the sound quality for you, the listener.
We want to, I want to, and I think Billy might be help part-time. Give you a little clue behind the scenes of our podcast. Billy handles the bulk of right now, entirely all the behind-the-scenes production. I have edited a few episodes before, and now when I, in this studio, I was living in an apartment, and I moved from a house with my own library and study and to an apartment with my now wife. So my capacity to do stuff like that was diminished. Now in this, I have a room almost dedicated to this now. So hopefully I'm going to do a lot more of that. But I would like to do some podcasts that are more general than just urban.
Yes. Yeah.
I'd like to talk about international wildlife and so hopefully we'll expand a bit. We'll keep the name and everything, but we'll have additional content that'll be more.
Maybe a separate stream of podcasts that we'll flag as Urban Wildlife Podcast goes international or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
We'll figure something out.
We are international, but I mean,
we are international.
I guess it's not so much international, but
it goes rural. Dun, dun,
yeah,
dun.
we'll talk. Let's talk about animals you can't find in cities.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, I bet that'll be hard. We could try. It's an interesting challenge. Pick an animal just because we like the animal, and then also, I bet it'll occur in a city somewhere.
Yeah.
I just got back. I want to say quickly from the island of Vieques, which is off the coast of Puerto Rico. It's part of Puerto Rico, but it's a separate island from the main island of Puerto Rico, and is not at all urban. The least urban place. Well, it's not in the middle of nowhere. There's towns, but not a lot doing in terms of urban life. And you were talking about island biogeography. I was sitting there like explaining to Gigi, like, here's why this small island in an archipelago of islands will be less biodiverse than the islands closer to the mainland. And we're going through like the species lists. I found some cool stuff. It's just less biodiverse than, let's say, Cuba or the Dominican Republic, or to take the mainland.
Yeah.
In the same kind of arc, like Panama. And so
or even mainland Puerto Rico.
Or mainland, or right. But as you go, you get less biodiverse. I had found so the two big finds for me that I had a good time with were the first blind snake I ever had in hand. And so these are snakes that look like worms. They live underground all the time. They mainly eat ants or termites, and they have reduced eyes so that you have a scale over the eyes. The eyes are visible kind of as like two little spots underneath scales, so they really can't see very well, if at all. And they just feel funky. They're like super, super smooth. And then the other one was a bird called Adelaide's warbler, where I was walking around and you'd hear them all over the place singing on the island, and I was sort of hearing them, and I was like, that's some kind of warbler. What kind of warbler is that? And I sort of glanced at the list before we left, and then I sort of like, I using my one birding skill, I pitched it out. The couple little guys like popped out and gave me the once over, and I was like, aha! You're a new bird for me. And so they're neat. They're like if you're used to looking at warblers in eastern United States, and in Canada, you got like.
That's not an Eastern whipbird in here. That's my
that's his
text tone because I left it on because we ordered a pizza earlier and I wanted to make sure I heard them.
So the warblers are yellow, sort of the yellow gray, charcoal and white color scheme you see on a lot of
They
North
look a
American
lot like
warblers.
a Canada warbler or like a Grace's warbler.
They do, like, yeah. The Canada was what I was like, oh, you look kind of like a Canada warbler, which is one of I think both of our favorite warblers. Fair to say?
Oh, I love Canada warblers.
Yeah, they're cool little birds.
Spectacular birds.
And so I had a good time on the island with those. And also they have feral horses all over the place. But also the first time I'd been in a place where they're not native iguanas. So iguana, I guess Miami. I've been to South Florida before, but like I hadn't spent enough time looking up around for iguanas. Here they were everywhere. And a guide on a nature kind of trip we did referred to them as gallinas de palo, which translates roughly as like branch chickens. So they're trying to get people to eat them because they're exotic. They're all over the place. An interesting question for me as someone who loves reptiles and amphibians is, would I eat iguanas? And I'm vegetarian. Not there yet. I
would eat barbecued iguana.
I might. It's the kind of thing that I might if I thought I was doing a service to the ecosystem. It's because you're in the position as a vegetarian. For me, as a vegetarian, sort of understanding and supporting, like, in principle, the idea or the need to kill certain animals that we have introduced or that are sort of pests. Essentially, I kill mice as pests. I kill cockroaches as pests. But killing animals as pests, that therefore, if I'm okay with killing them as pests, then I guess I should be okay eating them too.
I thought I did that. Sorry.
That's right. So anyhow, that's the side topic. Next thing I wanted to mention is that you can email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook. You can tweet at us at urbwildlifecast. I want to mention something on Twitter real quick. I got our Twitter account, and I was, I guess, manning it at the time, got pulled into a discussion about, it started off as a discussion about environmental education for communities of color, basically. And then the thread slipped into the question of like, well, especially for urban communities of color, it's a shame there isn't better wildlife to connect them to get them excited about the environment, about wildlife. And I was like, and I think the person who sort of tagged us into the discussion had the same idea I had, which is like, yo, what are you talking about? Yeah. And at the moment, I happened to be walking out of my office building for my day job, my office building, which is at the edge of Center City and Old City in Philadelphia, basically a very urban area. As I sort of glanced at my phone, I looked up, and I'm walking to get my dry cleaning, and I'm walking past Independence Hall, which is one of the most famous buildings in North America, and certainly urban. And I look up, and there's a red-tailed hawk perched on the weather vane on top of Independence Hall. So I took a picture of that. It didn't come out great, but I was like, hey, I'm looking at a red-tailed hawk right now on Independence Hall. And then I got my jacket, and I was walking back, and what was on the weather vane? Its mate. So there were two of them sitting on the weather vane. So I was looking at a pair, which I see around. I see these hawks around there. So a mated pair of mature red-tailed hawks chilling on top of Independence Hall. And I got to be like, there's wildlife here. Don't worry about it. It's a question of recognizing it and considering the space as a valid space for environmental education. And that's a whole other topic, but I enjoyed that little coincidence.
That's funny. Did we? I don't know if we talked on the podcast about when I saw some cool raptors at Independence Hall recently. I was down there because there was a alt-right rally. There was it was known that some Proud Boys, so those
these are the guys who are right wing, sort of alt right racists essentially.
Well, but they claim to be multicultural, and they're absolute fascists. They're absolutely sexist.
And they don't masturbate for some reason.
So they encourage them to
preserve their precious bodily fluid.
No, it's the that's Dr. Strangelove there. It's to encourage them to mingle with women, to try to actually meet and date women.
Because otherwise these guys are inept with girls.
Yeah, this is seriously how it works. I mean, they're literally the Gavin McInnes who founded it. I mean, they're
the guy out of Vice. Yeah, so weird.
Well, I mean, he's estranged from Vice, and they don't like him. But I mean, he now has disowned them because of their, they're getting in trouble for their violent tactics. But he patterned them after the brown shirts. They're really like a right wing street gang, and what these people do is they appeal to losers. I mean, they absolutely appeal to losers.
Here you can have some worth,
Yeah. And I'm sorry, but you can say what you want about Antifa, which is, and as far as I'm concerned, bring all, I'll take all the Antifa you got because I hate Nazis. And of course, the problem with Antifa is inevitably any kind of movement. There's going to be people who are gung ho and try too hard, but it's not an actual centralized movement. But say what you want about Antifa, but they get it on. They're not pathetic. They don't celebrate being an involuntary celibate.
But wait, so what are the birds you saw?
Right, so I was there protesting those D-bags.
Yeah.
And there was 40 of them, and I don't know, at least 1,000 of us.
Yeah.
But I was there, and I had brought my scope so I can digiscope pictures of Nazis and fascists, right? And lo and behold, I see a kestrel perched behind Independence Hall on a tower. A pair of red tails are circling, and then there was a red tail and a peregrine were mixing it up over Independence Hall.
So again, so you can go and you can. It's a great space for protesting. It's also just almost everywhere else in the city that we live in, which is a pretty big urban city. It's still a fine place to observe wildlife. Back to it. So we're gonna talk a little bit about the topic at hand, which is something. It's a specific topic that I was researching for Grid Magazine, which I write articles for, local Philadelphia environmental magazine. I write an article every month on urban natural history topics, and so I'd run into a woman named Cynthia Schema at an event at the Academy of Natural Sciences back in March, and she had a table up talking about something called, and she's a botanist. She is the she's a botanist at the Morris Arboretum of the University of Pennsylvania and the lead principal investigator for something with a badass name, the Mid-Atlantic Megalopolis Digitization Project. And we'll let her introduce and talk a little bit about it. It is a project where if you think of museum collections, and you think of how plants are preserved in museum collections. And when you think museum collection, if you're someone who's into reptiles, amphibians like me, you think of jars of pickled animals. And if you're someone who's more of a bird person, you might think of skins and drawers and that kind of thing. But with the plants, what happens is people press them, dry them out, and sort of attach them to pages of paper. And so then you have sort of the pressed and dried plant parts, flowers, leaves, seeds, whatever they can get on there. They're sort of the physical library of plants. The challenge, though, is how do you make that all searchable and something you can analyze and aggregate, that kind of stuff. There are various projects like this, digitization projects, so this is not exclusive to our region, but you probably have an herbarium digitization project where you are. The idea is to scan these things with really powerful scanners, and then the tricky part, which they use volunteers for, is digitizing the tag information. So you'll have the plant and it's a digital image, but then you have like the notes that some collector wrote out in the 19-teens, or let's say the 1790s or something like that you then have to take and type into a database. And then there's another phase of this where they geolocate it. They sort of find the coordinates to go along where they think where that specimen is collected. And so once you can do that, then you make it into something that has a lot more potential to be used for bigger data kinds of projects. What they found, anything that wasn't actually printed out on computer printers, this could be anything typed or handwritten, that there aren't really good enough optical recognition software for that. You end up with enough errors that someone has to go in and fix them. It's just faster for someone to read the damn tag and type it in. It's a good role for volunteers. I talked to a volunteer named Susan Hepler, who had a great comment about how this is something she can do. She can pour herself a scotch, sit at the counter in her kitchen in the afternoon, listen to NPR, and like type in some records, and thereby like help this project along. So
why? Because she has pictures of the tags.
So when you volunteer, what happens is you get the pictures, and then you have like an interface, like a portal where you then type the written information into the database. It's basically data entry, but it's data entry with some really cool old records. Like she talked about the fun of if you have a particular collector who you can follow their whole life, essentially, from when they started collecting something maybe in their 20s, let's say in the late 1800s, and then like you can follow their records that they've submitted and then put into this collection, and then you see them like tail off in the 40s, and that's it,
My name is Cynthia Schema. So an herbarium is an archive of plant specimens. So the plant specimens are dried and pressed, and they are kept there. So it's basically, each specimen is a physical specimen, an actual piece of a plant. And then with that, you have the information that is from the point of collection. So what the specimen is, who collected it, where they collected it, when they collected it. That's sort of the bare minimum of the information that comes along with the actual physical specimen itself. And they all get mounted on, archival grade paper, and then, they come together into a collection, and basically it's like a library of dead plants. With a lot of scientific value. That doesn't make it sound like it has a lot of scientific value, but that's the easiest way to describe it to people.
Well, but then, so sell it to somebody who might not immediately see the value in a library of dead plants. Why is it important that we have these and are able to share them?
Yeah, so really, herbaria, the collections themselves are the closest thing we can get to a time machine of previous habitats, previous localities, previous ecosystems. We know that this plant was growing in this place at this time, and this person picked it up and put it on this sheet of paper. And it's really a remarkable thing, because not only do we have that information about what plants were growing where and when, but there's also just almost a limitless. I say limitless because we may not yet have discovered all the things we can do with the actual physical specimen itself. But there's a lot of things that can come from having an actual piece of an organism dried and pressed, right? So, when people started making plant collections 400 years ago, or, and actually putting them in herbaria, then I don't think they anticipated that one day we would be extracting DNA from them to use in, molecular studies or something like that. So there's all these sort of really incredible things that come out of this physical specimen itself that, just grow with our understanding of science and our developments in terms of techniques and technology. So it's really a valuable natural history collection. And plants are nice because they really lend themselves to that sort of collecting, because they can be pressed. So, you can get a lot more plant specimens into a space than you can say with like a fish collection or a bird collection, just by actual logistics. So that's really nice too. There's the historical aspect. So, when you're looking at specimens from, say, the 1860s, and you start thinking about, well, this is phenomenal. This person collected this during the Civil War, right, in the Mid-Atlantic. So you start to think about, well, that's a real testimony to the amount of, love and interest in plant collecting that this person had, that they could do that at a time of, social upheaval during a war, and it just starts to resonate and really put you in the frame of mind of that person, I think, a little bit more than maybe during peacetime, So those are interesting. And the Academy found an incredible one during the MAM project. Alana Benamy found this specimen from Gettysburg that was collected, I think, like 7 weeks or like a couple months after the battle, on the battlefield. It was a collection from the battlefield. So that was a really incredible specimen that they discovered in doing this digitization, or rediscovered in doing this digitization project. But the Inquirer wrote a nice piece on that. So that was a really good one. But also, there's the things that occurred in places where they no longer occur. And that's always interesting. And that gets to sort of where, we're interested in plant distributions and how they're changing, thinking about what plants grew where, when, and how that's changed over time. That's the nice thing. That's the time machine aspect. That's where that comes in, is it starts telling us about how the flora of Pennsylvania has changed, and, including in the cities. So just thinking about that sort of thing, I was just looking this morning to sort of think about, well, okay, what's some, more local examples, and I was looking at stuff from, sort of the Wissahickon Park area, and just thinking of, the plants that used to grow there. There's some really interesting, like, trilliums or these walking ferns that have been picked up in that area, in the late 1800s that don't occur there anymore. And I even found a specimen that was an example of a pink lady slipper, the orchid, Cypripedium macaulay, that was collected in 1950, just down the road from the Arboretum here in Wissahickon Park.
Wow.
By Edgar Wary, but that's not something we see there anymore. Those are sort of the poster children for why herbaria are interesting. To get somebody who might not be, a plant geek already interested in these, pressed plants, dried pressed plants. But but the whole collection, as a larger body, in total, can tell us things about how things have changed. Like I was saying about distributions, it can help us figure out how flowering dates have changed. Some of our earliest specimens in this area are from late 1700s. So, if you have specimens that are actually in flower, you can start to map out how flowering times may have vacillated with the weather or have changed, in an actual trend due to things like climate change. So there's interesting questions from a scientific perspective that you get when you look at the totality of it too, which is really interesting. And is really, that's the main impetus for the project. So the project itself it's a digitization project that we call the Mid-Atlantic Megalopolis, and this is all funded by the National Science Foundation. They have a program called Advancing Digitization of Biodiversity Collections. So it's mainly a digitization program. And for us, digitization means that you take a specimen, you take a high resolution image of that specimen, and we're using 50 megapixel cameras, so you get nearly a 1-to-1 resolution. So it's almost like you're looking at the sheet itself when you're looking at the image. And then from that high resolution image, we actually transcribe all that collection data, the label data or the locality data that I told you about, who collected it, where they collected it, when they collected it. And then once that's transcribed from the image into an actual fields in a searchable database, it becomes much more useful, right? You can start sorting, you can start searching, you can start doing all sorts of things with the data once they've been databased. And that transcription step is really important because of the searchability. And then the last piece of that is to actually put a latitude and longitude coordinate on the specimen for where it was collected. And so some of that, maybe like late 1990s onwards, we can have specimens that a lat long reference is actually taken at the time of collection with a GPS device, but, besides those, you have no idea. So you actually have to go in and figure out, okay, this, from written locality data, well, this is where the person was, and we use various software programs to pinpoint that to a latitude and longitude. You can't always do it perfectly. There's some specimens that don't have specific enough locality data. It could just say Pennsylvania or, Philadelphia. And if you have that, you can't really get much accuracy in putting a point down. But we do the best we can with the information that we have. And then once you have that, you start getting, the actual geographical component to this. So you can learn a lot more about distribution once you have lat long assigned to these collections. And you can start looking at maps, and you can start mapping different things with substrate and climate niche and all sorts of things. So that's where you start to see the power of these collections coming together. And these digitization projects, it's really where, natural history meets big data. This is where we're really pulling all of that information that is housed in these natural history collections into a digital form that's really useful for researchers. Our specific interest here, we're in the Mid-Atlantic. Obviously, the name of the grant is pretty indicative of what our interest was. So, we're talking about the Megalopolis, right? So the Mid-Atlantic, from Washington, D.C. to New York City, some people define it as going the whole way up to Boston. But for the purposes of the grant, we were talking about D.C. to New York. And, it's the largest and oldest urban corridor in the United States. So for us, this really was, okay, well, let's see what we can learn from plant specimens, these dried collections, and get some idea of what's happened in urban areas, what has happened to the plant biodiversity in urban areas. And what we're actually digitizing is every specimen from all of the 5 states. So we're doing New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Pennsylvania, and Maryland, and then also Washington, D.C., the district itself. So from that region, the entire region, not just the cities themselves, but the entire region, we're looking at every plant specimen, digitizing it. And then that gives us the context for how things have changed inside the cities themselves. It's a 3-year project. We're 13 different institutions collaborating from the states that I told you, and we're looking to digitize just about 1 million specimens. We're at the point, so we're 2 years in on a 3-year grant at this point. Probably most of our collaborators will take a year extension, so it'll be a 4-year grant. So we're looking at, a lot of people are in the transcription phase. We have a couple people still imaging, but most people are in the transcription phase, and we're just looking to kick off the georeferencing part. So the main role that we have for volunteers in the project is in the transcription. So I told you that, we have these high resolution images, and but we have to get that information that's on the label in those images into a searchable database. So the big hurdle there is, getting people to actually just look at an image and sit down and type what it says into a database. There's been a lot of attempts to use OCR software, so optical character recognition software, to have the computer actually go through and read what's on the label and, spit out some text, and then you parse that into different fields. And so, we looked into all of that when we were sort of doing the prototype for the project, and realized that it's useful if you have very modern, text, right? So like printed, with a pretty modern computer and printer, and, it's very legible and everything. But even so, anything that's handwritten, the OCR software can't do, and then anything that's typewritten, even the OCR software didn't do very well. So we discovered pretty early on that it was actually faster for a human to sit and type it than to have it run through the OCR. And even, if you do that in the background, just the time it takes to fix the OCR text and get it into the fields was longer than it takes just to transcribe it. And then the other thing, having the volunteers actually look at specimens and transcribe them is a really nice way to engage people in what you're doing, right? So there are a lot of people out there that don't know much about plants and have no idea what a herbarium is. So this is your opportunity to not just tell them something like that, but also say, but look at these things, they're amazing, right? And there's so many angles that people hook onto. Like, some people are just total geography nuts, and they're like, oh, I know this location. This is, the Evans house of, out in Radnor, and blah, blah, blah. And, so they'll hook onto that, or they're just interested in the historical aspects of actually sitting there looking at a sheet that came from, was collected in 1810 or, 1885 or whatever it was. So there's the historical aspect, and then you also have the plant geeks who are like, this specimen is amazing, I know this species, or there's actually, we do get a lot of people that are just interested in the aesthetics of it, because there is something very aesthetically pleasing about a number of these specimens. I mean, they can be ugly, but some of them are very beautiful too. They're plant parts arranged in a flat manner on a piece of paper, and, when you start to look at them, it's attractive, especially if they're in flower, but also when they're not. There's a nice repetition of form and all sorts of things there. So it just seemed like a really nice way to actually do some outreach and get people, more knowledgeable, not just about the fact that, these are plants and they're living organisms and they're important for these reasons, but also, there's this entire community of scientists who make natural history collections and have been doing so for, hundreds of years, and there's a lot of value in these things, and we should all cherish them.
So there's multiple organizations, institutions part of this project. Not just Morris Arboretum, but institutions everywhere from like DC through New York. I talked to Tatiana Livschultz from the Academy of Natural Sciences of Drexel University, here in Philadelphia. Tatiana is Associate Professor in the Department of Biodiversity, Earth and Environmental Sciences at Drexel University, and is Associate Curator in the Department of Botany at the Academy of Natural Sciences. And so Tatiana was talking about how she had, in their own records there at the Academy, found stuff that Benjamin Smith Barton, who was a prominent Philadelphia naturalist, botanist, had collected from Bartram's Garden, which has got its own fabulous history. We're not going to go into it now, look it up. But it's a place you can go now as a park. She spends time and looks at plants and hangs out in a place where a giant of the field did his own collecting. That's awesome. So you're sort of literally in the footsteps of people like that here in a big city. So it's a fun angle on sort of the connection with the past that you can get through these collections. Tony, quick, for those who don't know what a pink lady slipper is, what is it?
It's a cool, native orchid here, has like a, I'm trying to remember orchid plant parts, but like the lower like lips of the orchid flower are really like deep and like, it almost looks like a pitcher plant. Yeah. But it's not, it's an orchid. And, but there's still lady slippers in the park.
Oh, there are?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hey, podcast listeners. I circled back to check in with Cynthia Schema about this. She said that actually right after the Grid article ran, somebody got back in touch with her to let her know about lady slippers growing in the Wissahickon. In her email, she wrote that she's happy that the pink lady slippers are still there and clearly being carefully monitored by at least one phytophile. So if you want to volunteer with the MAM Digitization project, send an email over to mamdigitization@gmail.com. Again, mamdigitization@gmail.com.
If you're someone who's into the citizen science thing, maybe you're someone who likes going out and looking at reptiles and amphibians during the herping season, but in the winter, you got nothing to do. You can become a volunteer with the Mid-Atlantic Megalopolis project.
Contribute to science. And also, if you do research, especially urban research, you should talk to us about being on the podcast.
Indeed.
We are, we don't have that many Twitter followers. Maybe if we were more active on Twitter, we would. But we have like close to 700 or whatever.
Yeah, it helps us get the word out about episodes.
But I swear about half of those people are researchers in this field, which is great because it's like, it warms my heart so much when, I'll take a screen cap of our followers, send it to Billy, but like, look at these awesome people who are following us. Yeah. But it would be great to hear from you. We think what you do is cool, and you're the exact people we'd like to talk to about your research.
I'm going to say something dangerous. We're running low on topics at the moment. I don't have a whole lot planned out beyond this episode. Got a couple ideas, but not a ton. If you've got a cool idea about what you do, what you research, or something that, even if you're not a researcher, if you're just someone who's more like me, who's more of a layperson, but really gets into urban wildlife, heck, this can be in Baltimore, this can be in Tokyo. Let us know, and we'd love to hear from you and what it is that you have a passion for and what you can introduce to the audience that we have. I wouldn't say it's massive, but it's got a heck of a lot of geographic scope.
Yeah.
A lot of listeners in Japan, in England, in Australia, various other countries all over the world. So we know you're out there.
And I think if you are a human being listening to our podcast, which only human beings listen to our podcast that I know of, there's a 70% chance that you live in a city about. So, there's lots of.
Yeah, we want you. Oh, I know what I wanted to do. I had a fantasy about Tony coming up with John Henry Was a Steel Driving Man, adaptation about digitizing, humans digitizing stuff versus optical recognition software. But maybe I'll have to wait for another episode.
Yeah, me and Matt can work on that.
Yeah. And then one other thing I wanted to quickly mention, just because we got to hype this. The City Nature Challenge is coming up April 26th, 29th. We're doing it for Philadelphia. It's going to be big. cncphilly.org if you're in the Philadelphia area and you want to get involved. But I'll say this is happening in cities all over the globe. We talk about Tokyo. Tokyo's taking part. Pittsburgh's taking part. Mazatlan is taking part. Various cities in South America and Africa and Australia and so on. Europe. So check out if your city's taking part and get out there and help show the people who just might not know it what kind of wildlife, what kind of nature, what kind of plants, fungi, even slime molds that we've got in cities.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care, guys.
Cheers.